責めないで消さないで負けないで誰だって持ってるはず譲れないもの
Hello again, and welcome to the next episode of the Who Cares About Anime podcast. I'm Jonny Lobo, and today I have, of course, as usual, a great cast with me, friends and peers in the anime viewing and critiquing world. So, to get the introductions underway here, you remember him from last time, of course. Here's Paden.
Yo, how's it going, all?
And once again joining us, my good friend, he found some time, the creator of Did You Know Anime himself, Michael.
Make sure you stick with us through the night.
And another good buddy of mine from way back in the Tenchi Muyo fandom, and you'll often find him doing translation over with tenchiforum.com and reporting various findings and keeping us all up to date via the Tenchi Cast podcast. Please welcome Wes.
How's it going, everybody?
All right. Well, thank you all, gentlemen, for being here. And today's episode, you know, folks, we didn't really plan it to be this way, but so far we're kind of getting a theme here. We've got like 90s classic Toonami / Adult Swim picks going on. But hey, that's not a bad thing in my book. So for now, let's just go with it. And the next title that we have lined up today is the one and only Outlaw Star. For those of you who don't know, it's quintessential 90s anime, but though it may or may not have been attempted to be duplicated over the years in some form or another, there's really nothing else like it. It's good seinen set in space. And here's the part where, if you haven't seen Outlaw Star yet, for the love of all things that are good and holy, go do that right now, because we're going to be talking about it, and we're going to be spoiling stuff undoubtedly along the way. So here's that first question. If you wouldn't mind sharing your circumstances of how you first got into Outlaw Star, and particularly since I think I'm not alone here in saying it is so unique, what were some of the things that really caught your attention when you first experienced Outlaw Star? And we'll start with Paden.
All right, well, I gotta go, first off saying I absolutely love Outlaw Star. I mentioned last week that Trigun was one of my top 3 animes, but Outlaw Star is in there as well. Outlaw Star is actually my number one. I have done 4 watch-throughs of this show, and every time I've watched it, just absolutely love it. First caught my eye during the Toonami run. One of the big things about it that caught me was the art style. It was it's got a really edgy kind of look while still being completely believable from a Western animation standpoint. And at the time that I was watching this, I was used to Western animation, and I really got caught in by this edgy kind of style that they have for the art in Outlaw Star that really it's really sharp, really crisp, and even for the time before it, was like digitally mastered, was just really a marvel to me of cinematic and animation masterpiece. Like, I really did enjoy going the whole saga of Gene and the crew. Gene particularly caught my eye a lot. He was one of the best characters I'd seen up to that point. I really enjoyed how he was just like completely competent on one hand and was extremely, deadly and a master in his own right, but he was just such a screw up, and I just loved that about him. And also the relationship between him and Melfina was one of my favorite relationships in anime, just because of the fact it's there, but yet it's also understated at the same time, and it just really develops very naturally, and I love that. Also, Melfina, waifu for life. Beyond that, just Space Western kind of caught my eye because of Outlaw Star. Had a really unique premise. It also combined, those who have seen the unedited version know this even more so than they've seen the edited version, which I'm sure we'll touch on later. But the caster shells that he uses throughout are actual magic, which is really an interesting thing to me because it's completely sci-fi other than that aspect in which they just acknowledge, hey, you know what, magic still exists. And it just really made for an interesting universe that I have never really seen the equal of. And the entire series just sticks to a campy, but yet very deep and very intricate storyline. And I cannot laud its praises enough. Everything about it caught me to answer your question, every single bit of this, from animation to storyline to the individual characters, it is by far, bar none, the top of my list.
You know, I'm sure this is probably a common theme throughout most people's experience on Toonami, but, you know, that is where I first saw Outlaw Star. Way back in the year 2000, which is now 15 years ago. I feel like an old man. You know, I remember one night staying up late on Friday, and I watched the Midnight Run, and, you know, I'm a 90s kid, so I grew up in front of the television, and I remember catching most of the first episode and a bit of the second episode, and, you know, I'm sure much like Paden and so many other people, I was transfixed by what I saw. You know, there was just something that commanded your attention, and you know, just the designs immediately strike you. Like, it's even if you had a point of reference with like Dragon Ball Z or Sailor Moon, Outlaw Star just had a different look to it. It felt more, just looking at it, it looked mature. And, you know, even though, like I said, I didn't have a huge expansion into the series, you know, initially I only saw the first episode and a half, but that's really all I needed to really tell me that this series was special. It was special right from the get-go. And it was a lot different than, you know, even the anime that I had seen at that point. Like, a lot of anime, Dragon Ball Z, Sailor Moon, you know, all of those were still very Japanese, almost extremely Japanese. They had, you know, heavy Japanese influence, and you know, like we talked last week with Trigun, Outlaw Star was much different. It was very distinctly Western, but it was very East Asianic, and so it had this really, it was unique. Unique is the one word I always come back to with Outlaw Star, and that, you know, that. But to put it bluntly and shortly for everybody out there, I love the designs. And I love what I saw.
I'll go ahead and reiterate that 90s kid that I am first saw Outlaw Star back when it ran on Toonami years and years ago. Again, like Mike said, makes you feel like an old man. What actually prompted me to try and stay up late, don't tell my parents, but what prompted me to stay up late and watch it back in the day was when I saw the Broken Promises commercial that ran on Toonami. I mean, other shows were featured on that alongside Outlaw Star, but Outlaw Star was the main one. And I remember sitting there watching it as Peter Cullen was narrating it and seeing the designs for the show. And man, that looks unique. You know, it has its own unique style, different from all the other shows that were popular at the time. And that uniqueness is what prompted me to keep watching it. And also because, you know, at school, most of my friends were big into DBZ. So whenever you got to talking about anime, or I guess we just called them cartoons back then because we didn't know any different. Oh man, DBZ, that's the show, man. You got to watch it. You watch Sailor Moon, you get cooties, you know, being boys. But, you know, then when I finally sat down and watched the show, as was said, just how mature it was even after all of the edits. You know, like in the very first episode when they open up the suitcase and Melfina's in there, and you know, in the unedited version, she's naked. But just stuff like that's what, you know, caught my eye to Outlaw Star and was what made me so determined to watch it, and ended up watching it and still love it to this day. Definitely in my top 5 anime of all time.
I certainly agree with it being one of my personal favorites as well. I mean, it's hard to not just fall in love with Outlaw Star. It's just fun, and it has a lot of depth to it too. But what really brings you in on the surface level, I think, is it's just fun. It's a space adventure, and you know, especially tapping into, I think that was amazingly effective ends used in the likes of, like you said, Wes, the Broken Promises bumper they had, and a boy has the right to dream. Not to say that girls can't get into Outlaw Star, I certainly hope so, but just something about being a young boy or a kid at that age, and the idea of getting to take off in a spaceship somewhere and go on adventures around the galaxy. That's just cool. One of my great regrets and personal marks of shame that I will have to bear for all of my days is that I I missed out. I totally missed out on Outlaw Star back when it was airing on TV. I couldn't remember even the year, but if that was like you said, Michael, 2000, I guess Tenchi Muyo just had its claws in me too much, and I was just in rapture with that, and some others like Dragon Ball Z, and I I totally missed out. I absolutely missed out, and it wasn't even like Trigun where it was like, oh man, you catch glimpses of it, and I did see that Broken Promises bumper a little later on, and was like, oh man, what is that? I got to see that, but it never happened, and time moves on, and found out about it like 10 years later via the internet, and I kept saying to myself, that's one even though I didn't see, I know that's a special one, and talking with all of my friends who've seen it, it is something very special, and it's almost a hidden gem. And I just said I want to do that upright. I want to get my own complete set, and I finally ended up running into at a time and a price range that I could afford. It was one of the Bandai re-releases of the complete collection or the complete series, what have you. And I just had my actual legit sit down like a year ago, and I was just like, oh, all the wasted years, why? But I was happy to have finally experienced it, and now I will continue to sing its praises. It's I'll say this a lot with a lot of things we cover probably over the podcast as we go, because I tend to like character driven pieces, and that's how I write as well. But you just have this this mixture. It's a formula from the likes of if you go way back to from American directors, um, one that comes to mind for me is John Ford, who is just seen as one of the greats. And I think one of the reasons he was one of the greats, I think he did a lot of westerns and stuff, which in a indirect but very clear way has a lot to do with the likes of Outlaw Star. Like Michael said, it's anime. It's set in space, but there is kind of that western mythos to it, like Trigun. And with John Ford movies, a lot of times it was just the process of the journey and the adventure. And I remember some critics saying this, like when you remember a John Ford movie, and I tried doing this, and sure enough, it was true for me. Was like you might not even remember what the plot was. You might not even remember where they were going all along the trail across the Southwest and the Old West, and had all these shootouts and bandits trying to get the carriage and stuff. But you would throw together this wide cast of characters into like a stagecoach or something, and you just have this collision of personalities and this mixture, and the end result would be when you start out with characters that by themselves are amazingly original or enigmatic, have depth to them, all that good stuff, and then you throw them all together, the the sum is greater, or the end result rather is greater than the sum of the individual parts in an amazing way. And I felt that immensely with Outlaw Star, and I think that's what caught it with me was, again, like you said, Paden, the mixture of kind of what we think is classic SF or sci-fi, and more fantasy and more magic and stuff like that, like, was really novel and really cool too. But at the end of the day, I think it was that magic mixture of characters and that collision. You throw a bunch of these characters. This one's an assassin. This one's a kind of a prodigy, 11, 12-year-old kid. This one, this one, she's Catal, and she's from a warrior race of cat-like people, and you're just throwing them all together, and the end result is magic.
Literal space magic. Preparation.
Literal rocket launcher space magic. Yes.
Literal Taoist rocket launcher space magic.
Despite largely being overshadowed by one of its, shall we say, kind of space western peers, we mentioned it in the last one with Trigun. I'm almost sure we did at some point. Cowboy Bebop. What impact do you think Outlaw Star has had over the years on anime and possibly other media, and basically what's the case for it being, um, to let people know it's not an inferior product to Cowboy Bebop. It's not a knockoff of Cowboy Bebop or anything of the sort. So, what are your thoughts on that?
Well, I think we can all in here say that it goes without saying, Joss Whedon, that Outlaw Star definitely had an effect on Western media. And, in making that somewhat loaded statement, I would even go so far as to say that Firefly and Serenity would not exist, period, without Outlaw Star. As far as Japanese media goes, I think its effects are far less. I was actually talking with Wes about this before we started, but when we're talking about the trinity of the space western genre, Outlaw Star didn't have nearly as big an impact as Japan because, much like all three of them really, they were made for Western fans. Shinichiro Watanabe was a big fan of Western directors, like, where most people today would say, Katsuhiro Otomo and, Tezuka. He was naming off, directors from the 60s and 70s. And so, there's that native audience was never really there for the space westerns. I think another part of the reason behind the fact that Outlaw Star and Trigun didn't have, if I had to put them all in order of their relevance to Japanese media, Bebop would be number 1, Trigun would be number 2, and Outlaw Star would be in 3rd place. But that's not because either of them were better than the other. It was because Takahiko Ito, the creator of Outlaw Star, much like Naito, although even more so, I didn't mean that to rhyme, he faded into obscurity. Like, he faded into the background because after, which we'll get into later, they were in talks to create an Outlaw Star 2, and various different forms, but ultimately, because Bandai Visual and Sunrise, who were co-owners of the franchise, of the IP, couldn't come to terms, they doubled down on Angel Links, and they called it a day, and Takahiko Ito never did anything else. Bebop's quality speaks for itself, but one of the things that has kept Bebop in the public eye is just the fact that every time, Shinichiro Watanabe's kept busy, and every time he does this new series, what do they put? When Shampoo came out, from the director, creator of Cowboy Bebop. When Dandy came out, from the director, creator of Cowboy Bebop. Like, every time a new series came out, and it also helped that those series were fantastic as well, but every time those series came out, you had Cowboy Bebop's name being, thrown out there. It also helped, too, in the States, where Bebop not only got very big, but it's, up until recently, it was literally playing on Adult Swim for a consecutive 10 years. Outlaw Star had a small run on Adult Swim, and after 2002, it has never been on American TV except for 2012, when it showed up for the April Fools. So, we want to look at, I read one time on Amazon, there was a guy who said that Outlaw Star is the poor man's Bebop. And that has always stuck with me because it's really kind of unfair, because even though all three of them, Bebop, Outlaw Star, and Trigun, are space westerns, they're radically different and come from radically different creators, even though they are very much influenced by Western media. Outlaw Star, I think, I was talking with Wes, Outlaw Star, of all three of the space westerns, is the most Japanese. It's the most Asian. It is the one that has the most influence. And when people look at it, they look at, they look at all of the Chinese media in there, and they think, well, why didn't it get big in Japan? Why was its influence not bigger? Well, just because it has that doesn't necessarily mean that that's going to gel with Japanese audiences. The very isolationist view of things. You'd think, kind of like with us, like if you look at something that is made for people in the Northeast, is that necessarily going to be conducive to people in the Midwest, in the Midwest or in the South? Like, in the Northeast, would you ever see a Bojangles commercial where they throw footballs that explode at a chicken on top of the General Lee? No, that wouldn't happen. So, while Outlaw Star did get big in Hong Kong because all the Chinese references and whatnot, and it got big over here because it's an amazing series, it didn't really ever capture anybody over in Japan. And so, because of that, so many things just kind of fell to the wayside. It didn't really capture anything as far as over there. But I will say, to wrap up this whole long explanation, is that going back to what that guy said about it being a poor man's Bebop, in 2006 and in 2007, it was in the top 30 highest selling anime in America at 28. And that's 4 years after it not being on TV. It wasn't talked about. There was no series that talked about it afterwards. Takehiko Ito was not doing anything. And in 2012, right before Bandai, rest in peace, disappeared, Bandai had it in their top 5 most successful anime properties they've ever had while in America. Like, period. Over everything else. Over Gurren Lagann, over, I'm not gonna say, not necessarily over them, but like newer series coming out, Gurren Lagann, the whole 9 yards, Outlaw Star was still in the top 5. So it might not have, I don't necessarily have specific examples where it influenced Japanese media, but as far as over here in the West, it had a big impact.
Well, thank you, Mike. That was extremely insightful and detailed. Paden, do you have anything to add there?
Yeah, just a couple things. First of all, I hadn't heard the poor man's Cowboy Bebop, and that upsets me at a deep level. But beyond that, as far as impact, yes, it was quoted the Joss Whedon Firefly. For those that do not know, basically, if you go through the first episode of Outlaw Star and the first episode of Firefly, just that in and of itself, you will see so many parallels that are just it's unmistakably plagiarism. It's ridiculous. But beyond that issue, I would say as far as the impact it's had on anime and other media, it really changed the game for the way space westerns were approached. If you look at most like anime, like space anime from pre Outlaw Star to post Outlaw Star, pre Outlaw Star, we had stuff, we had some of the Gundam series, we had stuff like that. We had it's like, it is sci fi. It is specifically sci fi, and that's what we've got. Well, after this, sci fi and fantasy blend together a lot more. We get a lot of aspects, even if it's not full out like high fantasy, we get a lot of aspects like magic or like these races of people that even though they could be considered aliens, they could also be considered like almost like an arcane origin. It's a really interesting take on it. And beyond that, it really did a lot, at least in my opinion. I saw it do a lot for the Western genre in general over here. Westerns kind of died off there for quite a while for a lot of people, and this is a combination effort between Outlaw Star, Bebop, and Trigun. Those three really kind of put it back on a lot of people's maps. And as far as being overshadowed, I guess my last notes would be that comparing Cowboy Bebop to Outlaw Star is kind of like comparing Lord of the Rings to Harry Potter and saying, well, Harry Potter's more, popular selling and it's got these 7 books and it's more modern, it's more this. Yeah, but they're two completely different things. You don't go in for the same audiences, you don't go in for the same ideas. Sure, they might both be fantasy, quote unquote, but the comparisons between the two, it's not even fair. It's like you're watching an entirely different genre for all intents and purposes. And I think that Outlaw Star has done more disservice by many people than just about any other anime I've seen, which is really a shame for what was probably the best product to come out of the 90s.
Yeah, yeah, and it's unfortunate because that's especially within my sphere of things, the word plagiarism. That's like a 4-letter word. I mean, that's strong. And Joss Whedon, he's very talented, brilliant even, I would say. And I haven't seen Serenity yet. I don't know why I didn't get to it, but watching Firefly, everyone who's seen it knows it's a good product. It's very good. It's just a shame when that kind of thing comes up where we were just reminded today. Paden, a professor of ours, has that same burning anger when it comes to Suzanne Collins, the author of The Hunger Games, which have since, of course, been a very popular series of movies. And she was blatantly asked about the Japanese landmark work of cinema, Battle Royale, because people were very much this similar thing we got going here. People watch Outlaw Star, people see Firefly, and people go, "Oh, cool! Wow, you've seen this too. You were inspired by that too. Wow, that's amazing." People were saying that with the author of The Hunger Games and Battle Royale, and she claimed to have never ever seen it, never ever heard of it. To which our professor was just he was just outraged. He's like, "Well, then she's lying. She's outright lying." And it's hard to call people on that. That's one of the reasons why it was not addressed in the we did for Did You Know Anime, we did Outlaw Star, and a lot of some people commented on that, and the reason why it's not in the video is because the man himself said, "No, I've never seen Outlaw Star." And as far as factual things, you got to go, okay, but as far as just us here, like just shooting the breeze, it's a shame because again, Firefly's very original in its own ways, and it's a great series. And if somebody who's as talented as Joss Whedon could just admit that he was inspired and took things from Outlaw Star, he ended up making, it wasn't directly copying the both products as a whole. It wasn't an Outlaw Star ripoff by any means. It's just like one who is familiar with that going in reasonably goes, "Oh, okay, that's cool. You were inspired by Outlaw Star. Wow, I've seen it too. That's really cool." And then they try and I don't know why they just can't quote unquote own up to it, because there's no shame in that. Everybody is inspired by other things if you're a writer or director or what have you, you're inspired by things. You don't just come up with ideas in a vacuum. No one lives in a vacuum. So that is kind of a shame there. So for listeners who haven't seen Firefly or didn't know about this or were wondering what's the official skinny on it, well, this is an opinionated podcast, and there you have it. That's pretty much our opinion. Is like Mike said, I don't think Firefly would have existed without Outlaw Star, and to that end, I don't think the person who made Firefly could have made it that way without at least somewhat knowing about the existence and being familiar with Outlaw Star.
One thing I just want to throw in here, I think there's always a discrepancy, and I always we kind of throw it around because it's kind of a really liberal insult in some ways, creatively, to say that someone did something like that. I mean, it goes without saying that the similarities are pretty much indistinguishable. Like, it's there. But, I always go back to this quote because it's an important one to pay attention to, is that Pablo Picasso, one of the most well-regarded artists ever, said, "A good artist copies, a great artist steals." It goes without saying, and much like I said, that if Outlaw Star did not exist, Firefly and Serenity probably would not exist. And, Joss Whedon there's also been a great number of similarities that have been made to the second season of Sailor Moon and Buffy the Vampire Slayer. Like, tremendous things that were found between both of them. But ultimately, it's not like somebody gave Joss Whedon this box full of materials and said, "Okay, adapt it." It's not like every little thing that he did came from Outlaw Star. Obviously, there's the live action conversion that happens. The difference between those, the characters, not him not owning up to it. That's definitely something. At least saying taking inspiration from, but I feel like a part of that is just because of the audience. Because the minute that he owns up to it and says, "Yes, I took from it," there's a bit of credibility that you lose with people because. I mean, even though with people in here, each one of us, we're all creators in some way. We do something like that. But, it's really hard to make that step because then people look down on what you do. And even if it's not malicious, it's kind of, like I said, it's a hard stump to get over because you can say, "Yes, I was inspired by this, and yes, this is what, I took inspiration from, and, this is how I adapted it." But he still did all the hard work, regardless. So, there's definitely a fine line that you have to go between, because ultimately, he still made it happen. Now, granted, if every little thing he did was lifted from every single episode of Outlaw Star, then we'd be having a different discussion. But I think just having similarities, like with Battle Royale and the Hunger Games, like, there are times where I've drawn characters that I thought were, oh man, this is a completely original idea. I didn't look at anything. I wasn't thinking of anything beforehand when I made it, and I've looked on DeviantArt and seen characters that are very similar just because, there seems to be like a common thought process or a primal thought process that people have when they make something. I'm not saying that people, they have like a mass disconnect of creativity that creates the same thing, but I don't think necessarily labeling Joss Whedon as, completely plagiarizing the work is the way to go. I definitely think, he gets credit where the credit is due, but there's definitely something to be said of coming out and saying, yes, I was inspired by it.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure it takes some courage to do, I suppose, but, I would still argue, it's almost like paying it forward. Like you kind of owe it. Like you're probably inspiring future writers and directors. And wouldn't it be neat if they said, "Oh, I was inspired way back in the start of the 21st century by Joss Whedon"? Wouldn't that be neat? And it's like, it's kind of there's a chain, a legacy of creativity, a passing of the baton. And I mean, you had thrown in Otomo earlier, amazing, brilliant director, writer, screenwriter, manga artist who created Akira. And of course, something as novel and landmark as Akira, people were curious, "Hey, what inspired you growing up?" And he straight up listed them: this, and this. And it wasn't blatantly Peyton at the time, but then you can look back and go, "Oh wow, cool, yeah, there is that. I see that now. Wow." And uh, but yeah, it's one of those kind of divisive things because we're in the gray realm, and that does happen. That does happen where you don't intend on something, and in that case, the internet can be good and bad. There is where you can make something and somebody later on finds something somewhere on the internet out there, and and it just so happens that if that pre-existed, oh, they must have taken from here, even if that's not the case. But I do think, on the note of the internet, is I think we are, there was a lot of, I think Whedon probably was of the school of thought. That's what a lot of people who ended up being filmmakers, what you would do is you were more so than the average Joe, shall we say, particularly in America. You were very literate, and you viewed movies and stuff from all over the world, and so you had this huge platter upon which to draw for ideas and inspirations. And before the internet, you could, you wouldn't have to admit to every little thing. People would never know. But with the internet now, it's kind of like everybody can see everything. Everybody has access to everything. And if one person notices it, then they're going to go on the internet and everybody now knows about it. So I think that was probably just kind of a general wake up call, probably for everybody now. The internet's amazing with for so many reasons, but it's I think it's changed things for those who are the producers of content. But long story short, I think it has had quite an effect, even if obviously we're not aware of every way it has been and may continue to well into the future, which is totally awesome.
Oh, I just had one final note where the plagiarism thing was brought up a couple times. I guess my clarification on that would be I would not consider it blatant plagiarism. Plagiarism is using someone else's work, without crediting them or things like that. I think the whole thing would be solved by him crediting someone, with some of these things, just like the battle royale thing you brought up. When you are blatantly taking the same exact themes or the same exact even if it's just the same exact images, you need to at least give the person credit or even give some sort of a grace note, like I've run across this and I found it inspiring, even if you don't say it inspired your individual work. Uh, because that's kind of like taking a quote, like a really good quote out of someone else's book and going, "Oh, I really like this. I'm going to put it in mine." Or I'm going to slightly paraphrase this and put it in mine. But that's not plagiarism. I just came up with it. I think if you just say, "All right, yeah, I took some inspiration from," as some people were saying here before, it would be no. Whedon's a very talented guy, but I do think this is one area where he needs to kind of own up, especially when given the timeline of when he started writing Firefly and when Outlaw Star really hit here. The timelines are just so. If he legitimately did not see it, fine, whatever. But boy, every single thing would have to be an extreme coincidence then, and I guess that's my piece.
All right. Well, let's shift into perhaps an equally difficult question potentially to answer. Is on more of a personal level, if you care to share. What impact has Outlaw Star had on you? And we'll start with Wes.
Might have to come back to me for this one.
All right. Mike?
Wow. This was talked about a little bit earlier. You know, I'm a music guy, so very rarely does a band have an album that's perfect. Very rarely in a couple of years does a band produce an album that from top to bottom is perfect. But you know as soon as you see or you listen to that first song that album is going to be a smash hit. It's going to be a masterpiece in one way or another. And I think, I would agree on Paden with this one. The Outlaw Star is pretty much perfect from top to bottom. Like, there's everything about it. It never stops going. Even when it slows down, it never really stops. And I think one of the things that the impact it had on me was, like so many good songs, Outlaw Star, I could see a bit of myself reflecting back when I watch Outlaw Star. We talked about last week with Vash, a lot of people can associate with Vash. I associate myself a lot with Gene, in that, I'm not somebody who has the strictest moral code. And I don't mean, like, that I'm like a sleazeball or anything like that. But, like, on the same token, I'm also not a soulless puppet like the pirates, I'm an outlaw. Part of that is Americana, sure. But, you look at the way that Gene handles everything, and it's just kind of like so many things from the show have resonated with me in the way that I look, in the way that I look at things, and the way that, it portrays things, and the messages it has. Like when Wes was talking about earlier, he talked about how Broken Promise Dreams, the bump that they did, which is arguably considered Toonami's greatest bump of all time. That bump is pretty much all Outlaw Star. One scene in particular, which has been, forever cemented from that bump, is the line that I'll expand on a little bit. Is Hilda and the gang are getting bombed. They've just left Sentinel-3. Gene naturally is space sick, I guess you'd say. It's not quite a thing we know yet, but I'm sure somebody will have it. And everything's going on, and you've got all this stuff flying back and forth. And Hilda, Gene walks up to Hilda, and he's like, hey, can I, is there anything I can do? And Hilda's like, well, you can man the turrets. And then Gene is like, I don't know, I might miss it like this. Just kind of like a very, not quite feel sorry for me, but, I really can't do it. And without even thinking, Hilda gets up, runs up to him, and grabs him by the collar and says, are you just going to keep running away? And it's kind of like that shock that he did not think that was going to happen. And he looks away and he says, just keep running away. And then looks right back at her and says, I'm not running. That has and will always stick with me, because in a lot of ways, aside from the fact that direction was fantastic, is that kind of highlights that 9 times out of 10, we hold ourselves back. Not everybody. So I said 9 times out of 10, but we are our worst critic and our worst enemy. And sometimes we just need somebody to grab us by the collar and say, are you just going to keep running away? And metaphorically kind of look at us and say, just fucking do it. And something like that has always had a profound effect on me. And a lot of what I write and a lot of what I draw has always kind of had that Outlaw Star funness to it. There's that everything has to be about the characters, because that show, much like so many other shows, I'm a character-driven story person. So you have these 6 characters who are over the top and larger than life, and you have people you can associate with, and it's just like, kind of looking. We'll go back to Joss Whedon a little bit. It's like, why would that not impact you? It's phenomenal, and in a lot of ways, that is what has inspired me. But something else to capstone on my already horrendously long answers in this podcast is, one time I saw a quote that was put on those anime demotivational pictures that people made. It had the crew of Outlaw Star doing their thing and Gene with his gun, and it's from H. Jackson Brown's mother. And it says, 20 years from now, you will be more disappointed by the things that you didn't do than by the ones that you did do. So throw off the bowlines, sail away from the safe harbor, catch the trade winds in your sails, explore, dream, discover. And that's what Outlaw Star did for me. It's hard, a lot of times people have, well, my kid was somebody who changed my life forever and made me think in a different way, or this event in my life did it. I can safely say that Outlaw Star was one of those moments because it's just said, do it.
Oh, where do I begin? This show had a profound impact on my childhood and really my overall outlook on life. Part of it would be Gene's overall outlook. I just think he's got a really unique, really cool outlook on life. This whole thing about he's got an aspect of seriousness to him that he can really jump in and do something. But yet he's also kind of a cheeseball. He's kind of got this idea of like, I'll pay you when I make it big because I just, accept the idea that I'm going to make it big. Well, of course, there's, when he's talking about that for the first time, I think it's really kind of cool. He takes it away from what his dad said. He's saying, there's something my old man told me a long time ago. He always said, people who think big, make it big. People who choose to only think small will only earn chump change for the rest of their lives. It's the way things are, and that's what business is all about. And, when he's questioned about that, they're, well, what do you mean by this? I don't know. I guess nothing. And it's just, it's kind of absurd, but it's really kind of cool. It's that idea that you can take something away from something that may not even be relevant to you at the moment and just really make it apply. But then beyond that, this idea of like looking for what's, the big dream at the end of the horizon, never like settling for, oh, I guess this will be okay in my life. I guess I'll go for this because it's easy. Like Gene never does that. And to me, that was a huge inspiration. And honestly, I agree with the quote Mike mentioned a few minutes ago. That's a really great moment. And just really I'd say one of the biggest things I took away from the show was the amount of quotable moments in it. One of them that always sticks with me, humorously and seriously, is when they're in a bar fight and Hilda just knocks the snot out of him, and Gene asks him, "So, well, so those guys are outlaws too?" And she just responds to him, "Well, it's just like with the stars. There are bright ones, and there are those that are dim." And that one always stuck with me because there's so much in this show about like, okay, if you work hard enough, you can get it. And then there are just some moments where they're like, yeah, but some people are still idiots. And I find that absurdity of the comparison there just amazing. It really does hit on both an idealist and a cynical outlook, and I really love that. And John, I believe you mentioned earlier the boy has the right to dream. I mean, what kid that heard that was not at least somewhat inspired by that? This idea that, you know what, I do have the right to think big. I do have the right to really go for what I want. And I think that's really cool. As far as other things to take away from it, there's one character in there that a lot of people just kind of blow over that I really enjoyed, and that would be Harry McDougal. And I took a lot away from him. While he's one of the quote unquote bad guys, and yeah, he's freaking insane half the time. He really is a good person at heart. Yeah, he's, obsessive over Melfina, and he like to a dangerous extent for himself and for others. But he really does try legitimately to be a good person and to protect those he actually cares about, even going, spoilers, but at the end of the series when he knew he might die and he programmed an AI of himself basically to live on, even though it won't be him living on, he programmed an AI of himself in order to upload to his ship's mainframe so that his brother would never have to be alone. I mean, that level of foresight and selflessness to me was always really, really inspiring and really something to strive for. And I'd say just beyond that, the overall theme, I mean, throughout half the show, they're trying to find the galactic ley line. And there's always this idea of the galactic ley line and, this thing you're questing for. And it's always this something that's just bigger than life, but they don't even know what it is. Like, most people just don't know what the galactic ley line is supposed to be. And yet everyone wants it. And I think that's really poignant. I think that this idea of this dream that everyone is striving for the same thing, but yet they can't quite put it into words and they can't quite put it into, like a physical form. And I think that's really, really interesting because I think it really parallels the way everyone looks at like success and being a successful person. The idea that there's this thing that you need to strive for, that there's this, prize at the end of the road. You don't even know what it is, but you want it. And you will do anything to fight your way there. And some people give up. Some people give up halfway along the way and they never discover it. But then those that really stick to it, whether for good or ill, find what they're looking for. And I just, something about that has always, always struck me as really beautiful. And I would say those, among many other things I took away from Outlaw Star, and I can't really narrow it down in one day or in one podcast, let alone what all affected me. But those would be some of my big, big moments.
Starting to regret my decision of not going first. Goddamn, I'm not supposed to follow that. Pretty much like what everybody else has said. A lot of what I took away from Outlaw Star was, a boy has the right to dream, and if you don't want to make chump change the rest of your life, get out there, dream big, go do your thing, go give life a shot in the mouth, and try it, and maybe you can make something out of yourself. And that's what I've tried to do. Because of that message that was in Outlaw Star, just the whole kick life in the ass message that Outlaw Star sent to go get out there and do it yourself. That was a huge impact that it had on me, and that's what I took away from it.
What I love about Outlaw Star is, I think, definitely in terms of something getting animated, is it's kind of a, at least again, what we get over here in the West, and because it's especially years ago, things were geared more towards, oh, it's anime, it's something animated, it's a cartoon, ergo, it's for kids. And so we got a lot of shonen. Most of what you will fondly remember from like Toonami and the primetime block and all that stuff, shonen. And that's perfect for, they hit that demographic right on the nose for kids growing up. It was right on the money for that, and it's very pertinent for particularly a particular spot where you're at in life, but it can have good morals and things for anyone at any age beyond that. But I love that Outlaw Star again. It's so fun and adventurous, and you can hop in when you're at that young age, but it's one where I'm looking forward to doing, like you said, Paden. This is one I'm going to come back to over and over again throughout my life, and titles that can do that for you. That's something that's really special. And so Outlaw Star on the outside and on the surface, it's very fun fantasy space, and that's totally cool for when you're a kid and it's on Toonami and all that good stuff. But me watching it a lot later, I didn't have that window of it being extremely influential on who I am, or who I developed into from being a child. But so I was thinking, oh, this is gonna be great. It's gonna be fun to watch. It's gonna be a great watch, and it was all those things. But it really did hit me as well. Certain things like Gene, I think he's very unique. So he's not quite like the everyman, but there are certain things about him that when it does strike you and it relates to you, it hits home. And one of those things with me, I think that anybody could relate to is you constantly see, when we see via flashback, his last interactions he had with his father, and he was still pretty young when he was separated from his father, and and that was the last time he ever saw him, and he over the years he has this, he put on this veneer, I'm a tough outlaw, I'm a rugged, you know, outlaw, and we all got to do that. You got to put on a little bit to move on, and to we say, oh, what doesn't kill you makes you stronger, and whether that's true or not, I do believe that we all go through things that, much like a physical scar on you, you never really get over. And it's sad to say that there really are things that never really fully heal, that never really fully go away. And one of those things for Gene is having his dad taken away from him. I mean, that was hugely influential on him, and I think was ultimately, he had that urge himself. He wanted to go and explore, as I think young people do, but he had all those hangups like Michael mentioned. And on top of that, it's like physically his body literally doesn't like being in space, it seems, because he gets space sick, which is hilarious. Like seasick, so why not? When when we're colonizing space someday, again, I think you're right. Some people are going to suffer from that. Hopefully they'll have Dramamine still. But I digress. Is that I think that's finally, I think it's initially the impetus, and I think it's also what initially, it was of his own strength and volition, but I think that was what, gave him the courage to go into space and to overcome that and become his own man, sort of, was just the memories of his dad. And that hit me, and because that doesn't have to have specificity to you, but it's kind of that where seinen goes, where shonen does not. That's where you jump ship. Is seinen really is that transition from innocence and childhood to the hardships of adulthood. And so we see Gene go through that. And another thing that struck me was I was pretty devastated when, like, she was like, boom, right off the bat. Like, I'm like, oh my God, my favorite character, Hot Ice Hilda, because she's a badass. And when she made that sacrifice, I was like, oh man, I was like sick for like an episode. I was like, man. But fortunately, there's so many other amazing characters, as we've said. But it's amazing to think about kind of what if, and not just your selfish reasons, like, oh, I didn't want Hilda to die because I like Hilda and she's a badass. But really, unfortunately, I don't think Gene would have been able to develop into the man he does throughout the series. He's I think like early 20s in the manga or the anime, when we meet him. And Hilda is kind of his guide into this wider world. As one Obi-Wan once said, you've taken your first step into a larger world. And so he needed that, but at the same time, it's horrible to think this way. But in order for Gene, who is the main character, to progress, Hilda couldn't stay around. I still don't. I don't want to see her die. I didn't want to see that. But it was very clear, and unfortunately, it came out in some awkward ways, kind of sexual undertones at several instances with Gene and this older and more world-wise person. And so it's unfortunate that he wouldn't have been able to reach his full potential until his mentor kind of again passed the baton, and then he had some big shoes to fill. But yeah, those are some of the takeaways I had with it, and I'm just looking forward to rewatching this thing again and again and having new takeaways every time I watch it. I know they're in there. Alrighty, this is a pretty redundant question, but how we answer will differ. Because the question I wrote up here is, would you like to see a sequel to Outlaw Star? Maybe I'm assuming too much, but yeah, if so, if you do want to see one, I'm assuming you do, whether fantasy or could that actually happen? How would you want to see that? TV series, movie, both? What are your thoughts on that? And we're going to start with Wes this time.
Well, all I'm saying is at the end of Outlaw Star, I was promised a continuation. So where's it at, damn it? But I mean, as far as what I'd like to see in a sequel, I'm not really sure as far as format goes. I mean, Bebop got a movie after it was done. Trigun got a movie too. And it's like what me and Mike were talking about earlier. One of the light novels that was made for Outlaw Star, which I'm sure he'll go into more detail on because he knows more about it. He was telling me about that, and I was like, "Hey, there you go, right there. It's already written. Why don't you just turn that into a movie?" I mean, I'm sure they'd have to update it, art style, and maybe tweak a few things to get it to fit modern day, you know, so more modern day viewers would be drawn into it. But that's an option right there. I mean, I know there's Angel Links, but that's not really a spin-off, and I feel like I should see it, but I don't really have a big want to, in all honesty. But yeah, I just want to. I was promised a sequel, and I'm I'm still waiting. I've been right here. I'm just waiting.
I think the answer to that question is a resounding yes. That of course, I would love to see a sequel to Outlaw Star. Um, at this point in time, I think a movie would be the best way to go because in order to get everyone back to do an Outlaw Star sequel of any kind, especially if we wanted to attempt to get some of the most of the people back from the phenomenal English dub, the shorter the format, the better. But I went over, and I have to give credit to outlawstar.co.uk, which is run by Mantis, phenomenal guy. There were obviously a number of different proposed sequels for Outlaw Star, and they ended up eventually doubling down on those ideas for Angel Links because, Bandai Visual and Sunrise equally owned parts of Outlaw Star, and they couldn't come to an agreement on the show, combined with the fact that, Outlaw Star was just not doing well enough in Japan. And so they would attempt to take some of those ideas and put them in Angel Links. But, I've always said this, and as soon as I found it while searching outlawstar.co.uk, there were 3 light novels. There were 2. The first 2 were retellings of the series. And then there was a third one. The third one was not actually written or made by Takahiko Ito, but it was made by the main writer, whose name escapes me right now, and Takuya Saito. Takuya Saito was the lead character designer. And they made a light novel called El Dorado Covered with Clouds, Starward Warrior Knight Outlaw Star. And basically the plot of that light novel is... It doesn't specifically say whether or not it's during the series or after. It's always kind of implied after because Aisha and Suzuka are living with the crew, and it kind of, from what I've read, it feels like it's set after the show ended. But there is a serial killer by the name of Billy McAglin, and they end up finding him through, they're looking for jobs, and they end up following him into a mining town that he lives in called El Dorado. And in El Dorado, the people they end up finding out he's killing are androids that are kind of like Melfina, and so naturally that causes the plot to thicken, etc., etc. And from the moment I read that, I thought, there it is, right there. You don't have to write anything else. Just adapt that light novel into a movie, and there's Outlaw Star the movie. It's like Wes said. Bebop got its movie immediately afterwards. Trigun eventually got its movie. It's time to give Outlaw Star its movie, and that's the one I would love to see turned into a movie.
Well, I would have to agree with the whole resounding yes to seeing a sequel. Although, at this point, I love the show so much, I don't think anything could possibly match the hopes and expectations I would have in my head for it. But seeing it would just be amazing. It was a phenomenal show that did not get nearly enough credit, and I think whether it be a TV series or a movie, it needs it. It ends on a point where you can actually accept the ending. It's left open-ended, but it's also one that leaves a lot to the imagination, and I'm okay with that. I actually prefer that rather than every ending having a nice sealed little knot, every wrapping having a bow. But I could definitely do with just a little bit more Outlaw Star. Chances of it happening, slim to none. Like, I do not hold out hope that will even begin to happen. And that's okay. I mean, it's disappointing, but I can live with what we got. But yeah, it would definitely be nice. I have not read the light novel aforementioned, but I obviously can't read it because it's not created. But if that was the concept, frankly, that would be an amazing film. Other than that, I have to say, really, they can't do too much wrong by it right now. They've done so many spin-off movies of so many anime, and you know what? If you like it, great. That's an awesome addition to your product. If people don't like it, you don't have to accept it as canon, whatever. I think at this point, yeah, it definitely it's earned its dues. It needs to be able to have one. Will it? Probably not. But the fanboys out there can hope.
Well, I think, yeah, obviously I agree. With going back to when we said it's kind of a audacious statement, but if ever there was a series that, being true to what it is and what it set out to do, as it stands right now, the series Outlaw Star is perfect. I mean, it really is. It's just perfect. And so the ending was great. It was wrapped up nicely. Everything was wrapped up what needed to be, but it was like the adventure goes on, and that's a great ending. I love those types of endings because then you just think, well, that's the end of our time with them, but they're going to go on and live their lives, because you get attached to them. They're people, and so it's kind of like, I mean, I guess it's like a big bowl of ice cream. It's like, do I need this? I guess you could say no, but do I absolutely want it and would I love that? Oh, yes. My inner 10-year-old boy is like, yes, I want more ice cream. I want more Outlaw Star. um, I think the big kicker with Outlaw Star in hindsight now, especially like Trigun, it was long in the tooth, but even it got its movie, which we discussed last time. Last time on Who Cares About Anime. I apologize to everyone for that. But the reason why I think people really hung on the point, not only in hindsight now, it's kind of like, okay, 2 out of the 3, quote unquote, got it. So come on, which is reason enough. But also just that ending, that last slide. See you later. It did, like you said, Wes. Like, we were promised more. I think that's what everybody goes to, and I mean, why wouldn't that just absolutely get your heart pounding? And so it was kind of very bittersweet when again my first actual sit through full run was very recently here, and I know full well that a sequel hasn't happened. So when I read that, it was like a tear welled up. I'm like, oh, but I haven't seen you guys. When will I see you again? So I love your idea there, Mike. I think we had brought that up one time some time ago, but yeah, yeah, I didn't know about that. I bet a lot of listeners out there didn't know about that. But as far as especially the environment nowadays of companies not wanting to take too big of risks, wanting to adapt something that's already on pen and paper, so to speak, even if that hasn't been published in a legitimate capacity. Like you said, it's right there, and just from that brief synopsis you gave, that sounds like Outlaw Star to me, and nobody in the world, I think, would be opposed to more of it. As far as in hindsight, if that ever happened, would reactions be like Badlands Rumble? Who could say? That's in the realm of conjecture. But where we are right now in a world that doesn't have a continuation of Outlaw Star, I think we all on some level are like, yes, like why not? Why wouldn't you want more adventures with Gene and the crew? Alrighty, I think now we'll just open up to general discussion. Some of the things that I had thought might be possible is if there's any other themes people want to extrapolate on, although I think we did a great job of that. Also, how about some Outlaw Star Blu-ray? How about that? And I think we also covered this pretty well, but a lot of times, for some reason, people kind of, I think, going into it, probably more often than not, if they're not familiar with one but they are familiar with the other. It's usually Bebop, and they're saying, "So how is Outlaw Star?" and wanting to compare it to that. So I don't want to do the dreaded comparison because again, they are very different. But if people did draw that line in the sand, if someone drew that line in the sand to you, would you be able to answer that? Would you be able to pick one?
Oh, definitely. For me, at least. I mean, I love Cowboy Bebop. Don't get me wrong. I think fantastic voice cast, particularly the English dub. But you draw that line in the sand between Outlaw Star and Cowboy Bebop. I'm going to be on Outlaw Star every single time. I mean, Bebop is great. Bebop is wonderful, but it's got its praise. It's got its fan following. It's got all of the support it needs without me. I am all for Outlaw Star. I am, and I think weirdly enough, the fact that it didn't become such a huge hit, that it's such a like an undisturbed, unperverted gem of an anime is part of the draw to it for me. And also, didn't mention this earlier, but just with that comparison, how about Bo Billingsley, voice actor of Jet from Cowboy Bebop, as the narrator for Outlaw Star? I mean, to me, that's part of what makes the show. So weirdly enough, one of my favorite parts of Cowboy Bebop is actually one of my favorite parts of Outlaw Star as well. So just have to, while that comparison's up there, I have to bring that up.
It's also, the parallels also don't end there, because I also have Wendy Lee, who plays Suzuka, and Faye Valentine.
Oh yeah, two amazingly strong female characters that are each really unique.
If somebody said pick Bebop or Outlaw Star, I'd pick Outlaw Star every time. Like, Bebop is a good series. Make no bones about it. But I think in a lot of ways, for me personally, I think Outlaw Star was the better series. It was just more fun. Like, Bebop takes a little while to get going, and once it gets going, it's pretty good. But for me, you have to weigh everything together, and I think that Outlaw Star at its worst, I think, is much better than Bebop at its worst. And there's never a moment where I don't want to just jump back into the XGP15A2, aka the Outlaw Star, and just say, okay, where are we gonna go now? The very last episode where they're leading out, and it's just like, some say they found the galactic ley line. It's just like, that's it, man. Like, they are their own legend now. Like, that's such a great way to end it. So I always say Outlaw Star.
I mean, I don't really have any issues of drawing that line in the sand and saying Outlaw Star. You can say it's because of the nostalgia goggles or whatever, but it's like what Mike was saying. Bebop, it's a damn fine series, deserves all the praise and respect it gets, but it takes a while to get going. There are people who, if somebody's never seen Bebop before and they say, hey, what's the best way to watch Bebop? Some people will tell them, well, watch episode 5 first and then go back and watch 1 through 4 after 5, just because the pacing's not that great in the beginning. With Outlaw Star, I'd say the pacing from start to end is pretty much damn near perfect. Again, like Mike was saying, Outlaw Star is a little more fun in the way it does things. Bebop's just very serious in nature, very noir, and it's centered on the characters and all their hang-ups and whatnot. And again, that's part of the reason why it is revered the way it is. But Outlaw Star, you got to have a lot more fun with what the characters did. It wasn't all centered on their hang-ups and stuff like that. So for those reasons, as everybody else has said, draw the line in the sand. I'm picking Outlaw Star.
Well, I'm impressed with that, and I always am like, ugh, because I mean, like you like you said, Peyton, it deserves it. It's a great series, but Bebop has no shortage of worshippers and people singing its praises, which is awesome. Outlaw Star needs more of that. It's amazing how much it is still kind of a gem, even though it had a run on Toonami back when all these other shows, that's what cemented them in an entire generation's mind forever. But I feel I get all flip floppy when sort of like when we asked, okay, like shootout, Trigun versus Wolfwood, and I'm like, I hate to just outright go, oh, one's better than the other, but I kind of take the back door in and say, but like, well, who could beat Vash in a shootout? I don't think anyway. So it's kind of like with Outlaw Star, like, I hate to say that directly about something in Bebop, it has earned its pedigree by and large, but is it or anything else that's in the ballpark? Is anything better than, Outlaw Star? I'm not going to say that because, again, looking at it holistically and how it was adapted over here, voice acting, that was great. You brought up Bo Billingsley in the beginning of Outlaw Star. I never once skipped those. Never once in Outlaw Star. A lot of other series, admittedly, like you get like 15 episodes in and it's like some sort of rehash or something like that, and you're kind of like, okay, I'm just gonna skip this. No one will know. I never once did. It captivated you every time and brought you in. But yeah, holistically and the pacing and everything else, Outlaw Star is objectively Like, I'm sorry, I can't say that Bebop or Trigun. I mean, any of the three, so to speak. I can't say any of them's better than it because how could they be?
And one of the things that people tend to look at Bebop in kind of the same way they do as The Godfather. They say, well, no, everything has to abide by this bar, and it's such a shame, really, because Outlaw Star has so many moments like that. Like there's that I can't think of the name of the theme. You want to talk about serious moments, that harmonica theme that's in Outlaw Star that plays during like some of the more serious moments, like especially when Gene is having flashbacks. It's just like that. It's incredibly disappointing that, much like Bob Buchholz to Steve Blum, Outlaw Star has kind of always played second fiddle to Cowboy Bebop, and it's not like we're comparing a good show versus a bad show. We're comparing like two shows that are very legendary in the genre that they're in. And it's kind of one of those situations where all three of the Space Westerns came out in Japan the same year. And so you have this like, what do I do? It's like when you get 3 or 4 amazing games that release all in the same month. It's like, who gets my attention? Who gets my time? And, generally the one that doesn't win out can sometimes always be an amazing experience, and that's kind of what I think a lot of people do with Outlaw Star and Bebop, and it's unfortunate.
Any other comments or anything of the sort?
My big one would just be everybody. I mean, obviously we all love Gene. Gene is a very lovable character. Everyone loves Melfina. Those are some great characters. Other than those two, who is everyone's favorite character? Like you can, I'll say you can pick one male and one female because there's such a strong female cast and such a strong male cast that you can't. It's not really fair to just pick one. So one guy, one girl. Who's everyone's go?
Gosh, I had already said earlier in this own cast, like Hilda was like my favorite character, and that was going in, and it's really hard to hold on to that when, unfortunately, she's there for such a short amount of time. So she always will be one of my favorites. But like female characters, like again, like I said before, kind of like you feel this void in the crew when Hilda's gone, and then it's you don't want to admit it at first, but it's sort of like when you get a new puppy and it kind of fills that void after a while. For me, let's see, we'll do female. I love Aisha. I mean, like, oh, she's a go-getter, to say the very, very least. To the point where it's crippling oftentimes. She doesn't really think things through, and she's very much a, let my fists slash claws slash bestial form do the talking, and maybe we'll ask questions later. But the way she will go into these fits and these frenzies, especially when she's pursuing Gene and Jim, and she'll come across them, like when she was having to be a waitress to pay to get off that rock she found herself on. That was God, those are some hilarious moments, and her name escapes me, but amazing voice actress for the English version there. And then male, since we're saying, yeah, other than like Gene or Jim, which theirs is an amazing dynamic that you don't see all that often. Just the banter you have from a 20-year-old and like an 11 or 12-year-old is just hilarious in ways you wouldn't even think of. But I like Fred. I like Fred Lowe. Like, I mean, I don't even know if I can say more than that. He is a side character, but every time there's an episode involving him, I loved it, and he's just a great supporting character.
Straight up, as far as male, female, Gene and Aisha, and again, everybody loves to fawn over how quote-unquote good Cowboy Bebop's dub is. There is not anybody on planet Earth who could have played Aisha better than Zahn did. Like, straight up. You think about it, you take it for granted when you're sitting there and you're listening, but just like how animated she sounds, and how, like, you think about people doing Catgirl voices, and how it's always very like it's always very cutesy, very Japanese, very nyan nyan, and you know, stuff that you're not really whatever. Like it's not really a thing. But when you actually need an animal who sounds like a cat, like a big cat, perfect, literally perfect. Bad puns intended. It's just like it. But you know, not looking at those two, I have to give a special shout out to Ron McDougal. I loved Ron McDougal's character. Like I loved his voice. Just another like every other character in the show, voice fit the person perfectly, and I just I loved it. I loved how Harry would go off and explode, and oh my God, Ron, why do they hate me so much? And he's like, "Don't worry, Harry, everything's fine. I know a guy. It's cool." Just like I always loved that about Ron, even though he was a crazy asshole.
Oh man, favorite two other than Jean and Melfi. Well, as far as female characters go, probably going to be Aisha. Just like was said earlier, just some of the situations that she gets into. You know, very strong female character. One minute she's kicking ass, like in that wrestling episode where she's Fire Cat, and everybody needs her to win so they can get Fred out of the predicament that he's in, and then she turns all out cat and all hell breaks loose. Or then you've got some of the funnier situations where, like when she was a waitress and Jean and Jim go to eat at the restaurant, and they, she has to take care of them because she's the waitress and she can't do anything because they're the customers. It's like in the hot spring episode, hot spring Planet Tenray, when Gene keeps trying to go up the mountain and he keeps getting knocked down by giant snowballs. Whenever he lands in into the girls' hot spring, all the other girls throw shit at him and try and kick him out. But fucking, what does Aisha do? Oh, did you come here to sneak a peek at Aisha, huh? Like, oh my God, it was great. And then as far as male characters go, probably Jim. Again, part of it is because of the banter that Jim and Aisha have together. You know how it's almost like a big sister, little brother type thing. How she's always looking out for him and whatnot. But just how Jim is a contrast in a lot of ways to Gene's personality. Gene's older, but he's in a lot of ways he's a lot more carefree. Doesn't really worry about the finances of Starwind and Hawking, whereas Jim's all on top of what parts they need and how much money they have, and Gene's just like, oh, put it on a tab, or who cares. Jim's just like, Gene, we can't do that. We don't have the money. So other than those two, Jim and Aisha all the way.
Yeah, I'm gonna have to echo everyone else here with females. Like Aisha is my favorite female character, and this is really weird for me because you see that kind of brash character show up fairly frequently, especially in like shonen anime. But something about her just really speaks to me differently, and I think part of it's her character development throughout the series. She really becomes sympathetic as she moves on. And when you first meet her, you're just kind of like, man, this girl is a joke. Like from the first moment she's sitting there, like, oh, our beastly powers are amplified by the planet's moons. And Jean just like, this planet doesn't have a moon. Oh, you're right. And just completely whiffs it. It's You can't take her seriously. But then, as was mentioned before, the Fred Lowe predicament, when she rescues all of them, oh my gosh, she becomes just a fighting force that you just can't even you can't even compare her to anything. She's just a force of nature, and I think her character is just so interesting. And despite the fact that she's played for the laughs a lot, she really does have a lot of depth to her. As far as male characters go, I mentioned this earlier. I love Harry McDougal. I think I don't know what this says about me. I tend to like the characters that are slightly mentally unstable. But Harry, I find it interesting that he is a character who really does have great intentions, like 90% of the time. And he really is like really a person. He has his own desires. But he has like the interests of his brother, the interest of Melfina, the interest of everyone he actually cares about. He really does want the best for them. but things just set him off so easily, and he just struggles to, make peace with that, and he just loses it. I just remember him like smashing on a door at one point, just die, 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 and just losing it. And every time I see it, I'm just like, okay, calm your guns down there, man. But I get where your passion's coming from. Honorable mentions, I have to agree. For the male side, I have to quote two of my peers here. John, I agree with you on Fred Lowe. I mean, he's just a great character. He's so funny, and he's really is the comic relief of the show. But he's such a good guy, and I feel really bad that they edited him so much for the Toonami version, which of course, at the time, LGBT issues were not really looked well upon. So he was just the eccentric instead of, realizing that, Fred was gay. And they just kind of covered that up. And I think that's one thing that the uncut really does better justice with. And then, Wes, I'm going to agree with you. Jim is the, Han Solo to Gene's Luke Skywalker. It just wouldn't be the same thing without him. And gonna mention, as far as an honorable mention for female characters, Iris, the blonde waitress at the bar that they frequent back on their home planet. She's only in a few episodes, but she's just this spunky little waitress that just has such an attitude, and she's just very real, and I really appreciate that. That even some of the smallest characters in this show just have such big personalities.
Yeah, that's really something when your tether and your responsible one is not the older one, is not the grown ass man. It's it's Jim, and that never ceased to be hilarious. And also, great job mentioning this, Wes. That reminded me, not to go too much in the good old days and back in my day, but that really struck me on my viewing was like that's how that's how fan service is done. My literal reaction to it, and I was telling people this, and I'm like, it sounds like an oxymoron when I say it, but this is what came into my head. I'm like, that was a case of tasteful fan service. And you'd think like, is there such a thing? It's a bit of a guilty pleasure, but like that's nothing for very long revolves around that. It's there's an episode it's very comic relief. It's for that. But on top of all of that, when he goes up to the mountaintop with the sages, you get a little bit of backstory on these rocket launcher space magic bullets in the caster. So it's functional. And at the same time, there are moments with Aisha and Suzuka and the rest of them where it's like, okay, we know our young male demographic. Like it's there. That's what it's for. It's a little bit of fan service sprinkled in, but it wasn't a genre in and unto itself. So that was just one of the many little things. All of them add up together that Outlaw Star just did about everything right. Well, once again, I want to thank you all for being here. Appreciate your time. And hopefully everyone out there listening enjoyed it as well. If you did, feel free to subscribe. We're here on YouTube, and we'll have some links for you in the descriptions as well. We're also on iTunes, and we'll probably throw in there, since we didn't get around to talking about Blu-rays, other niches within the fandom of Outlaw Star, and all that. Unfortunately, it's under construction right now, shall we say, but as was previously mentioned, if you want a fantastic resource for things of that nature, and in a fan community setting, outlawstar.co.uk is the place to be as far as I'm concerned. So thank you again, gentlemen, for your time. Thank you, listeners, and we're going to keep on doing episodes, switching out the seats here and there and changing the titles, and who knows what'll be next, but whatever
Yes,
it
he
is.
does. Yes, who does?
but does he? I don't even know. But but hopefully, Outlaw Star can say this legitimately someday. But much like the ending of Outlaw Star, kind of become our little closing here is thanks again, and we'll see you next time.
掴み取れ青すさな